So I'm going to introduce a new object type into our learning, and that's what's called an array. What is an array? Well, in plain English, an array is a collection of something. For example, say one of your friends has a nice collection of video games. You might say, oh, that's a nice array of video games you have. It just means a collection of something, so a lot of something. And in programming, it's very similar. Let's take a look at this very basic example here. What I have here is 6 variables of type integer. Integer is the data type, and I'm just outputting the first one to the screen. Very simple. So say if we emulate a lottery application, the user picks 6 numbers, and then we put each of their numbers in a variable, and all the variables are unique. But what if the user picks 1,000 numbers? Then I'm going to have to create 1,000 variables. It's going to be really tedious. Our application is going to use more memory. It's going to be larger in file size. And it's going to take a really long time to develop as well. So how we can overcome this problem of having all these variables with different unique names is use what's called an array. And what the array can do is group all of this information together into one variable only. So let's take a look how we can represent these 6 lines of code here on only one simple line using arrays. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to define and initialize an array right here. We want all our items inside the array to be integers, so numbers. So we're going to use the int data type for our array here. Then I'm going to use open and closed square brackets. That's telling the system, hey, I want to create an array. We're going to give the array a name. We're going to call it numbers. So we've declared the array right there. And now we want to initialize the array, which means we want to put some data inside it. And we can do that on the same line. So to do that, we're going to say new. Then I'm going to put the data type again, the square brackets again. And now I want to put values inside this array. So I use open curly braces, closed curly braces, and then a semicolon. Now inside these curly braces, I'm going to put the values. So I can put 2. And when I put a next value, I use a comma and then 12. And now the next value, 26, 45, 56, and 71. Now this one variable here called numbers is an array of type integer. These are all the values inside it. And now this one line of code represents all of these 6 lines here. So now we no longer need this. So now how do we actually access the numbers inside this array? Well, we take the name of the array, which is numbers, and then we use square brackets. And inside the square brackets, we put an index for our values. Now, when we talked about substrings before, I said the index is generally in CSharp start at 0. So this is item slot 0. This is item slot number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So even though we have 6 items, this is index 5 because this is index 0. So bear that in mind when working with arrays and collections and things like that in CSharp. So if I want to access this first item, the number 2, I just put 0 in there because it's at index 0. So if I run the program now, you can see it's outputting number 2 here, which is our first item. Similarly, if we want to access the number 12, I just put 1 and I can run the program and then it outputs 12. So very simple, that's how you actually access the information in the array. You use the square brackets, but you put an index inside them. If we try and access an item outside of our array, so for example, index 45, well, we only have 6 items in our array. So if we run the program, it's going to throw an error. And typically the error will say something along the lines of, it's outside the bounds of the array. That's because we don't have 46 items in our array. So it's just telling us, it doesn't exist. I don't know what to do. So one other thing you might want to do with an array is you might want to define the array, but we don't know what information we want to put in it yet. Maybe we want to define the array here, and then we want to do some other cool stuff. And then later on, further in the application, we might finally know, what numbers we want to put in here, for example. So what we do in this case, when we define the array here, we want to put like a capacity in here. So it says here, if we actually hover over this red line, array creation must have an array size or identifier. So basically it's saying how many items will you have in your array when you want to use your array. So I know I'm going to have 6 numbers because it's like a, for example, it could be a lottery application where there's only 6 numbers. So we define it with a 5 here. And if the index starts at 0, then we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So by putting a 5 here, we're saying we're going to put 6 numbers in this array. I hope that makes sense. So now we've defined the array. Now we still need to initialize it because we have no values in here. By default, if I try and access the values in the array, even though there's no values in here, it's going to output 0 because this is default behavior. So what I want to do is now put a value in the array. So I'm going to put a value in the first slot, which is index 0, and I'm going to put the number 777 in here. So now when I run the application, we can see the value 777, and that's how you actually initialize an item in your array. Similarly, if I go to the next line and try and put a value in the next one, Visual Studio is actually predicting what we might want to do here. You see these gray characters here? That's basically saying if you press tab on your keyboard, so let's do that, it's going to enter that for us, which saves a lot of time when programming. And then we can put that in there, for example, and then we can access index 1, which should be the value 456, which it is. So that's actually how to put values in our array. And because we've only defined an array that can contain 6 items, similarly, if we try and put a value in slot 45, it's going to throw an error as well, because we're outside of the bounds. So the last thing I'm going to talk about with arrays, well, the first thing, before the last thing, arrays is one of many collection types you can use in C#. There's arrays, array lists, dictionaries, but this is something to get you started with on how to manage lots of data, for example. So the last thing I'm just going to go over quickly is your arrays can have pretty much any data type. We can have an array of strings, for example, and this could be people's names. And then we need to make sure when we initialize it, it actually matches the data type. Let's delete that. And now we can put some names in here. We can put in Henry. We can put in our friend Bob, etc. Now we have an array of strings. Okay, so when we access our array, we can just do it exactly like before. And let's access Henry, which is the first item there. So when we run the application, you can see it outputs Henry. So remember, when you define an array with a string data type, all the values need to be strings. Similarly, if you have an integer array, you have integers here.